The purpose of this video is to look at a GCSE chemistry question for organic chemistry. The question is taken from the 2019 paper 2 and it's question number 4. Ethanol is made by fermentation of a carbohydrate dissolved in water in the presence of yeast. The reaction is carried out at 30 degrees C. Explain why the reaction is carried out at a temperature of 30 degrees C rather than at a temperature of 80 degrees C. There are 2 marks available for this question, so we're looking for 2 points in the answer. It's important to note that higher temperatures are not always best for all chemical reactions. In this question, the important thing to note is the presence of yeast, and yeast contains enzymes. The mark scheme has 2 points. First of all, the yeast provides enzymes, and the second point, that at 80 degrees C, the enzymes are denatured. The exam board would allow that yeast provides a biological catalyst, or the yeast provides zymase, or the yeast contains an enzyme. The exam board will also allow that the yeast is denatured, but it will not accept and it ignores any comments such as the enzyme is killed. Here is a typical student answer. As fermentation uses enzymes, this means that the enzymes will denature at 80 degrees C and not 30 degrees C. The candidate scored 1 mark because they recognised that the enzymes will denature. However, they didn't link the enzymes to the yeast, so they lost the first marking point. Another student wrote 30 degrees C is the optimum temperature for yeast as a catalyst, and too high temperatures will denature the enzyme, the yeast. This was a good answer and scored both marking points. A third student's answer said, because the enzymes inside the reaction would denature at a temperature too high. Also, alcohol burns easily, therefore if the temperature is too high, it could begin evaporating. The candidate scored the mark for saying that the enzyme would denature, but the misconception that the alcohol burns or evaporates would be ignored. For the second question, ethanol can be converted into ethanoic acid. In this reaction, ethanol is oxidized. Answer B. B is the only correct answer. A, C and D are factually incorrect. Draw the structure of a molecule of ethanoic acid showing all covalent bonds. So every single bond should be drawn out. And there were 2 marks. 1 mark for showing the correct functional group, the carboxylic acid group, COOH, and the second mark for showing the methyl group, CH3. This student lost marks because they didn't draw the correct functional group for the carboxylic acid group. They missed out the carbon-oxygen double bond here. Part C. The apparatus in Figure 3 can be used to investigate the temperature rise produced in a known mass of water when a sample of ethanol is burned. The first steps of the method are 1. Put 100 cubic centimetres of water into a beaker. 2. Determine the mass of the burner containing ethanol. 3. Measure the initial temperature of the water. 4. Place the burner under the beaker of water. 5. Light the wick. Describe the remaining steps of the method that are needed to determine the mass of ethanol required to raise the temperature of the water by 30 degrees C. There are 3 marks available. The answer should include heat the water to increase the temperature by 30 degrees C. And then any 2 from extinguish the flame, determine the mass of burner containing ethanol, or reweigh the burner, subtract the final from the initial mass to calculate the change in the mass. Here is a typical student answer. So keep looking at the thermometer until it reaches 30 degrees C. Once it reaches 30 degrees, extinguish the flame, not by blowing it out, but by suffocating it. 8. Measure the mass of the burner containing ethanol. Take the new mass away from the initial mass. The students that did not gain full credit often lost marks as they stated the temperature rise. I'll start again. They didn't get full marks because they say the burner should be extinguished when the water reaches 30 degrees C, rather than by saying the temperature of the water has increased by 30 degrees C. In this case, the student still gained 2 marks from the last 3, and so still gained some credit from the answer. In a different experiment, separate samples of the alcohols methanol, ethanol, propanol, butanol, and pentanol were burned to determine the mass of alcohol that needs to be burned to raise the temperature of 100 cubic centimetres of water by 10 degrees C. Draw a graph of the mass of each alcohol required to raise the temperature of 100 cubic centimetres of water by 10 degrees C against the number of carbon atoms in one molecule of that alcohol. 3 marks available. So on the exam paper, there is a copy of the axes. So the mark scheme expects you to show a vertical axis with a linear scale that uses more than half of the edge of the grid. All points need to be plotted to within plus or minus half a small square and a single line of best fit drawn. Here is a student's answer. In this case, the student used less than half of the grid, so it was a very small graph, and so they lost one of those marks that were available.